Hey, welcome to this ACTS webinar on communication here at the ACTS Academy. While Nate is sort of getting me some of your questions that you have, I'm sure we'll have some of the other questions. Let me just take a quick second. If you're new to the ACTS Academy, thank you for being a part of it. Make sure that you check out the rest of what all is there. There's some amazing resource for you. There is ACTS questions where you can specifically ask a question. See what I did there? You know what I mean? Ask a question. Anybody? Yes. Slow clap. Dad jokes. Okay, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate that, Sheldon. That means a lot. But what I really want to make sure that you take note of is the ACTS course section. There is hours of content that I've already pre-recorded in our 7 buckets that really will help you shape your life. Just giving you the tools to be able to continue to pursue what you want to do and make and become. And I think the best version of you will make the best product, whatever it is. Whether you're at a church or at a bank, or you are a dad, or you are, in college, I think that the best version of you will do the best at all of those roles. So check those ACTS courses out. There's always the ACTS Cast, which is basically a podcast with a public and private version. There's a number of episodes that you can get caught up on. And everything's free, believe it or not. Here at the ACTS Academy, it's all really generosity based. So if you are currently donating at whatever level it may be, thank you for sewing into the ACTS Academy. If you have not done that yet, and you want to be a part of that at that level, please do so, because without you, we really can't keep it going. We usually like to try and tell people when they ask, well, how much do I need to pay if I'm going to donate to the ACTS Academy to keep it going? $100 a year is a great starting point. You can always do less. You can always do more. 100%. Let me hear you say this again. 100% of the proceeds go back into shaping the ACTS Academy for you. I don't pull a salary from the ACTS Academy. It just goes right back into making content for you that you want to know and that we think you should know. So let's jump into some of these questions about communication, and then I'll give you a few things that I want to talk about. I know there's a number of you that are different communicators at different stages, let's say, or maybe even different settings, whether it be in a public school or private institution, a pulpit, a corporate setting, even with a small group, or when you are with just friends at a table. It's important to sharpen the art of communication. I believe 100% that is going to continue to be one of those art forms that will define us as a people, and it will define you as a person. How you can articulate from point A to point B. Your ideas are great, but they're useless unless you can capture and really land those ideas with that audience. So let's talk a little bit about the first question. Specifically, the question was, how do you pace a message? That is a good question. How do you pace a message? Maybe it would be a sermon, or let's just say in my context, like a public school setting as well. I think pace is a lot like a race. When you find yourself in the race, you're going. And I think it's important before you ever get to that starting line to understand when you need to push it harder or further, or it's like that cadence that you need to have pre-planned. So how do I pace a message? Well, first of all, before I even get into the message, I start examining the parts and start really looking at what pace those things need to be. I like to think of it as a floor or a ceiling. I think pace is important. Pace is, vital for a runner's success. But I like to think about it in the context of you're going to have a floor where it's going to be the baseline, like this is going to be the heaviest moment. This is like the biggest, like thing that's going to happen in that message. And then you have a ceiling, and you have like that moment where this is going to be the most joyous, the most, out of control, the most, we don't know what's going to happen. So I like first to not only, determine the pace while I'm speaking. I would encourage you, number one, to really understand the pace before you even start your message. What do you think needs to take place? And then establish a floor and a ceiling. If you're writing a sermon or if you're making a talk to a live audience, and you can't tell me the emotional floor of your talk, and you can't tell me the ceiling of your talk in your notes, then you won't ever really have a good chance to master this whole thing called pace. So that would be the second thing that I would encourage you to do, is before you start, think about your parts and where you feel like the pace is going to be. Third thing, determine your ceiling and determine your floor. The third thing I would say this: think of pace like a faucet. Think of it like my kids were playing with water balloons today. They were like out front in the driveway, and it just looks like literally a water balloon apocalypse happened. When I was a kid, we'd have to fill one up, and then we'd hold it, and then we'd tie it with our little fingers, and we'd get one done, and it would take like 30 minutes to get like 8 balloons. My kids hooked this hose thing up and filled 100 balloons in like 60 seconds. It was insane. Okay? So that water coming out of that house has a faucet, has a spigot. And sometimes you want your audience to intentionally feel like they're drinking out of a fire hose, where you're overwhelming them with information. And sometimes you just want to turn it back so it just gets succinct and you just capture what you're saying. So that would be the third thing I would suggest you all to do, is as a metaphor of choosing pace with your message. Think of a water faucet, high, low, mirror it, not mirror it. The other thing I like to do too is, just so you know, and maybe we'll talk about this, but on any talk I ever give, I put it out on note cards. And on the back of that note card, I always write two things. The chemical, we talk about this in the C4 content of Acts Academy. We might dive into a little bit that tonight. If you don't get it, there's chemicals that you're inducing into your audience. There's 3 of them specifically. It's in the C4 content at the Acts Academy. I always write down the chemical, and then I always write down the emotional response that I think the audience is going to have. So if I'm telling a story about a lion, I know the chemical and I know the emotional response. What I've noticed is when you're looking at emotional response of your audience, what you think it's going to be, if you think they're going to be laughing, generally that pace is quicker. Generally that pace is just got a lot of stuff firing at them all at once. If you feel like there's going to be an emotional plea or a heavy point that you really want to land, generally that pace slows down. I'm not a hype preacher, so to speak. I'm not going to like shout at my audience, and very rarely do I ramp things up. And so it's just important to know when you're landing a point, generally it'll just sort of slow down. But those are just some forethoughts right off the cuff, but make sure you watch that about the chemicals in the note cards so you can really name those things. Second question, how do you find good stories? That's great. If you're a communicator and you're not reading at least 1 book a month, then you are going to fail to communicate. You need to be reading at least 1 book a month. I don't know what it is for you. I personally love autobiographies. I love theological books. I love books on nature, books that are nonfiction science books, generally because that's in my wheelhouse. You know, you can find a lot about just metaphor if you're looking for it. But you need to be reading at least one book a month. I have tried to position myself now post-master's degree here where I'm reading 2 books a month or 3 books a month, fully ingesting them, not skimming them. So number one, you got to read. And if you're looking on how to do that well, I'm not, I hate to say another commercial, but there's How to Read a Book. There's a small little video in the Acts Academy. I covered that, how to read a book. Check that little video out. I'll give you some notes on how I read a book, specifically to get the most out of it. Because, you can read a book, but if you don't remember it, who cares? So number one, read. Number 2, journal. Your good stories are going to come from your own story, someone else's story, or God's story, which is the revelation that is, the natural world, and then the revelation that's the written word. And you need to write those things down, because you will forget your story. The intricacies of part of it. You'll forget what you felt at that funeral if you don't write it down. You'll forget the story you heard about somebody, and you'll just won't remember it. And a lot of times, if we're not journaling what the Holy Spirit's speaking to us about, specifically from my faith and Christian perspective, when I'm reading the Bible, a lot of times I can forget the whisper. So you got to be reading books, at least one a month, and you got to be writing stuff down. If you do those 2 things, I think you're going to find yourself on you'll find good stories. The third thing I'd say about how do you find good stories is go live a good story. Go feed some people. Go love somebody. Bob Goff's Love Does book, it's all it is Bob just going and making his own story. I love Bob, and for a lot of reasons, because he's always like, oh, hey, everybody, oh, how you doing, oh, hey, and he's the best. But the point is he's not looking for a story. He's going to go make the story. So that would be the third thing I would say. Read a book, write it down, make a good story. Third thing, how do you find creative inspiration? This is a great question, because I think creative inspiration, usually we attack it by the thing we have to do. But all creative inspiration or all great works of art start with a blank cursor, start with a white canvas or a blank canvas. They all start with something that is nothing. And so I would encourage you all, when you start looking at creative inspiration, to stop looking at what you have to do and start looking at what you need to stop doing, so you can see the blank canvas, so you can look at the blank cursor, so you can have the margin to create. I was just at the Grand Canyon, and this thought really struck me. Of course, I wrote it down, but really what it comes down to is that the Grand Canyon needed space to create. With water needed space to create the Grand Canyon. And you really are no different. You have to have this space, this margin for creative inspiration to come. If you don't have that, you just won't find it. So that's something I would say right away. We talk about this, about Sabbath, about rhythms, about rest. How do you find creative inspiration? Make sure you are intentionally placing margin in your life so you can have the space to create, number one. Number 2, I think it's kind of tied into the second question here on how do you find good stories when you're looking at creative inspiration. But I really like to look at people, this is going to sound morbid, but people that are dead. If their stuff is still around after they're dead, you might want to pay attention to that. I love reading books where the author died 100 years ago and we're still reading that book. I love looking at art that was painted 500 years ago and we're still talking about that art. That has just been a benchmark when it comes to finding creative inspiration. I would say this: it's more important that you create the space so creative inspiration can find you. And then I would simply say, you don't find creative inspiration. You filter the inspiration of the kind that you want. And I want to be inspired by people who made work, made art, made sermons, made a message that's still around after 500 years. So I wouldn't even say find, I would say the word filter the creative inspiration, because creative inspiration's around you everywhere. You're bathed in it. How do you filter it is maybe even a better question. Number 4, different ways to start a message. I'm assuming that this might be a sermon or, let's say a talk of some sort. There's a couple different ways to start a message. In the Acts Academy, there is a book list, okay? And I want you to check out The Methods and Teachings of Jesus by a German dude. I think his last name is Stein. But he talks about a bunch of the ways that Jesus would have taught or did teach and why it's so profound. So you got a couple different ways to start a message. Number 1, there are no loose ends. Nothing is wasted. Don't start a message with a stupid joke and then you're like, well, moving on. I've heard that so many times. I've been somewhere where like the person walks out on stage and they're like, well, if you, they just tell like a Chuck Norris joke, and they're nothing to do with anything. What did that joke have to do with like the message? It doesn't. It didn't have anything to do with it. So just be mindful of that when you're creating that intro, that it must come into the message somehow. I like to think of an intro as a diving board. When you create a message or a sermon, you're creating a diving board, and that diving board or that launch pad is literally the thing that you're going to jump off of, or that rocket's going to shoot into the stratosphere off of. You create that diving board, and then it launches you into what you're going to talk about. It's not wasted. In your intro, in your beginning, you're constructing the thing that you're going to leap off into. There's a couple different ways you can do that. You can use like that proverbial pull the rug out from underneath them, where you think it's going one way and you go a complete different direction. There's a rabbinical teaching technique called inclusion, which is a really fancy word for the message will begin and end the same but different. Most of the Bible, especially in the Old Testament and ancient Hebrew literature, is written this way. Joseph, the guy with the awesome Technicolor coat, he's going to have a dream, and he dreams he's going to rule over his brothers as like these reeds. And then the story ends with him ruling over his brothers. Sarah is said that she's going to give birth to a boy, and then she gives birth to a boy. I mean, so there's these parallels that happen sometimes where it's inclusion, and that begins a way and ends a way. I really like to do this. I talk about this in one of the C4 courses. But if you're going to create a message, I really love to do a couple things in that message to start it. Number 1, create the diving board that you're going to jump off of. Number 2, qualify and really engage with your audience. If you qualify your audience and you engage with them, you draw them into that diving board, and they're going to jump with you. You're not just going to be the lone guy, doing the cannonball with your swim shirt on by yourself. You want to create that diving board, but you want to capture and invite that audience with you so they make that leap with you. And the third thing that I love to do in the front end of that message, or how you're going to begin a message, is create tension. Create tension, and you will have their attention. And also, it's okay to give them a roadmap where we're going, creatively, subtly, like in just a tasteful way. So those 3 things is how I would begin a message. Create the diving board, create the appeal or the attraction with your audience so that they jump with you, and then create that tension so you have their attention. So those are just some real simple ways. I talk about more of that at length. I want to hit all these questions. There's like 8 or 9 here, so I want to make sure we nail them. Number 5 is, how many points should your message be? That's a great question. No more than 400, no less than 2. That's pretty much, I think you can't really answer that question, because I don't think art is created. I think art can sometimes just create itself. And I think if you're going to try and approach how many points should this message have, you're really going to bankrupt the discovery that is the message. And if you don't have an open heart and mind to what you're creating, and you establish the box, then you may make something that just fits in the box. I struggle with that. I don't think any talk can have less than 2 points, unless it's just a statement. So I'll give you an example. If you're going to make a talk about, let's just say pink elephants, you need to, create that diving board with your audience. Hey, I was at the zoo in Omaha, Nebraska. They had this amazing atrium, and they had these elephants over there, and they were all gray. And I've never seen a pink elephant. But what I'm encouraged with is that every single one of us can start thinking differently about the elephants that are in our life. And then you go into I'm just shooting off the cuff here. So you want to totally make sure that your points fit your topic. And so if I was going to talk about pink elephants, you might go through its ears, its tail, its feet, what are the properties of an elephant? And then you all of a sudden have 5 points. You might want to say early on, we talk about your anchor sentence in the C4 content. Every single person in this room can master the art of, feeding pink elephants with these 3 keys. I created tension. You want to know what those 3 keys are. I have a message I preach from time to time about 4 kites, 4 discoveries, and there just happens to be 4 kites. And I never really came up with the 4. The part of scripture did. So I think when you ask that question, I don't want to belabor the point. How many points should your message should be? More than 2, less than 400. But don't box it in from the beginning. Let the message sort of create itself, and you'll see it become something altogether, maybe something you didn't expect. The little caveat or the little asterisk I'd say there about that is know your audience. If you're talking to a junior high audience, don't have 9 points, man. Don't sit there and think that they're going to track with you through the linear content for 45 minutes. Say 2 things really well and really concise, Don't say one thing, it's just a statement. It wasn't a talk. There was no outline. That's just ridiculous. But don't make it so different or so difficult that they can't get it. So know your audience. If you're at a young college and career audience and they're engaged and they're ready, you can have 5, 6 different rationale points. The other thing I'd say about this, now that I'm talking about it, I see a lot of people make this mistake where they have a point, okay? Let's say they're talking about every parent should play Friday night Fortnite with their kids because of these 3 character building attributes that making forts in the living room will bring. And, the first thing is they learn creative skills. That's the first point. Make sure that your point, your rationale is supported by your illustrations, by your stories, by your context, by your co-text, by your sources. I see a lot of people tell us all the illustrations and the stories, but they never give me the point. So I just would simply say, make sure that you can name the point, the rationale, and then let all of your creative flow fall, under that, and then rename the point. That's really clear communication. So like, all of you have heard God's voice, and then you come up with all the reasons and the illustrations, and then all of you have heard you repeat that point. When you encase your rationale or your points with all your illustrations, that makes it really clear for your audience to do that, to grab it. And that's really so important. Number 6, how do I be a unique voice? That is such an interesting question. Man, how do I be a unique voice? Well, originality is really creativity that's at some level borrowed. They say there's nothing new under the sun, yet all of our thumbprints are different. So there's tension in that statement. And if you're really looking to be a unique voice, I would really challenge you to shift your focus a little bit, because those self-questioning type goals, it's like we're pursuing the destination, but we're forgetting the journey. Do they like me? Will I be remembered? Am I different? These questions really shouldn't be our focus. None of the great artists in the world that we still talk about, that really shaped art and literature, really said, I'm going to intentionally be different. They just were different. It was just them. So I think it's a little bit more about some discovery along the way. I like to do a couple things. Number one, I like to always sort of visualize the kind of communicator that I want to be, or the outcome that I want my audience to have, that sort of end product. I like to make sure that when I'm going to get in front of people, I don't have a shadow mission like will they like me? Will I be different? Is this going to be good enough? I've really tried to kind of stop evaluating the nitty gritty there. So I think the easiest way for us to be a unique voice is to not get set on that as a destination, but get set on the art and the thing that you feel like you want to make, the way that you want to make it. A lot of that comes by seeing how it's done that you don't like, or that you felt was not as dynamic or powerful as it could be. A lot of it comes from, wow, that was amazing. I just experienced that speaker, that communicator, and I am moved. It changed me. That was unbelievable. But I've always remembered this quote, and it's from Jackie Chan. And he just says, I never set out to be the next Bruce Lee. I just always tried to be the real Jackie Chan. And I think that is so important for us as communicators when we're looking at our uniqueness, to like not try and be like that person or not try and be like that person, but be inspired by that person and be challenged by that person, but really make the art that you want to make it. I fortunately have just, been dumb enough and I guess lucky enough to use art and to use metaphor and to just kind of stumble into my voice. But I will say this, it didn't happen overnight. And it's still evolving and still changing. I have a degree in music. Some people know that. And I was in a punk rock band in college. And these were in the days when I was really listening to MXPX. Some of you might know that band. I was listening to MXPX and All American Rejects, like, later, but MXPX all the time. And so every song I ever wrote, it sounded a lot like MXPX because I was inspired by them. And then when you finally start listening to a number of those voices, you get inspired. But what it really comes down to is a true communicator, a true artist in that craft will be inspired by all those voices, but then they will discover their own voice and what they want to be heard. And it just unfolds. So how do I be a unique voice? I think be inspired by a number of different voices, both in what you could do, what you shouldn't do, what you love to do, what you didn't love. But then at the end of the day, be on a quest to discover internally what you're going to do, what's going to make you articulate it the way that you would do it. And know that already you are unique. You already are different. There are so many of you that are listening to this that don't be me. And that's why it's called the Axe Academy, because I don't want you to hold the hatchet that I have. I want you to discover your voice. I want you to be you. But the question, whoever wrote it, it's not a bad question, but it's fundamentally flawed in the fact that we're trying to be unique when we just need to realize we already are. You already are unique. There's no one like you. No one can say it like you. No one has a story like you. Now, when it comes to shaping that craft and getting better at those things, well, that's why many of you are here. But just make sure that you are inspired and encouraged and challenged by all these voices, but really decide for yourself and think for yourself and ask those critical questions for yourself so you can emerge. But please do it not as something that you're journeying to, but journey from, because you already are unique. Journey from the fact that you already are this unique creation, not something to become unique. That mental shift will not only keep you from falling into the state of comparison, but it might just help you have the courage to discover yourself along the way. Number 7, books that you would recommend on communicating. Super easy question because you have the resource. If you're in Axe Academy, just go to the Path to an Axe. There's all these books I want you to read. There's some Skype stuff that you got to do. You got to stick around for a little bit, and then I actually ship you a throwing tomahawk in the mail. Underneath communication, there's a number of books listed there that you can read. That changes all the time. I've already mentioned one. There's another one called Experiential Storytelling that I really like from a few years ago. We can blast that out. There's one of the masters, Ken Davis, old comedian. He did an awesome book on communicating. Stephen King's book on writing was mind-blowing from writing, but also just from the craft of communication. That was amazing. There's a few of them, honestly, and I list them in the Axe Academy, and I don't want to belabor that point because that's pretty easy. Number 8, Olive Garden, fine dining, ? Like, can I bring someone there for their first date? That's a good question. I've been married for 19 years this fall, and we went to the Olive Garden tonight with 3 kids. So if that's any context for if you should bring her there or him there on the first date, just let that be the guardrail there for you. I personally maybe wouldn't. There's probably a lot of other shops. Hey babe, we're going on a tour of Italy there, don't you know? Hey, oh, where are we going? Oh, the Olive Garden. All you can eat breadsticks. and salad there just because I know you how much you like to eat there. That's not going to go well. All right. Another question. Reading through the comments. Everybody is here. Is there a way? This is a good question, Sheldon. And hey, if you're there, those of you that are there, let me just take a little quick pause here. Tim, Josh, Craig, Eric, Tola, I think Toya. Oh man, that's sick. I love that spelling. Toya, Craig, Eric, Michael, Angie, Sheldon, Nate. If you have another question, just throw it up in the chat. If you want to know where that is, it's super easy. Just on the bottom, it just says chat, and the window will pop up. Just type it in and just send it over. That way I can get it. Sheldon, you asked this question. Good question, Sheldon. Is there a way I can work on not getting stuck in a monotone or one-tone voice throughout a message? Yes, there is. I love to have my pacing mirror my frequency. So when I am here and I'm landing this point with you, Sheldon, I'm going to be down in this frequency. I'm going to use just a talking voice. I'm going to pull the mic closer. If I'm wearing a headset, let's just hope it's EQ'd right. But this is where I'm going to live. I'm really down there talking through like the important things. It's just going to get to this point. And then when I'm really going to fire something out, and I'm going to have you drink out of a fire hose, and I'm going to constantly bring this energy, and I'm telling a story, and it's funny, and it's amazing, I'm actually going to bring my frequency up here, and I'm going to talk here, and I'm going to be like, man, it was crazy. You should have saw these people. They were over there. There was clowns with sharpened teeth, and these guys on scooters, like the Shriners with the little hats, and they're throwing out candy. I got hit with a lollipop in my eye. It was amazing. It was great. It was a mystery one. I was so stoked. I'm going to bring the frequency with the pace. I think a lot of times people forget that they're using a microphone as well. So number one, Sheldon, have your pace mirror your frequency. That usually is a really good just train of thought. If you're going to slow it down, you can darken it down. If you're going to speed it up, speed it up and bring it up. The second thing is, I've heard a lot of people do this, and it drives me a little bit bonkers. I try not to be overly critical. As a communicator, I sit down in front of a pastor or another communicator, and I have to just curb that sometimes because I'll miss, what God has for me. It's kind of like if you're a famous acrobat and you go watch Cirque du Soleil, you're going to be picking apart all of their moves. You'll just miss the show because you're just thinking about the mechanics. And as a communicator in that art form, I do the same thing. But I see this happen where I would see somebody on stage and they're actually talking a certain way on stage, and then they get off stage and I meet them in the lobby or the green room or backstage, and they sound totally different. It's like, were you were the person up there? That was you. All right. Okay. Well, how did you all of a sudden switch? And I noticed that I noticed that I guess at times, and it just drives me a little crazy, that there's a speaking voice and a conversation voice. And you don't want to have those two. So let your pace mirror your frequency. Let those mirror. And then number two, make sure that when you're talking in front of people or on a camera, take a deep breath and just, talk how you normally would. And you'll find those subtle inflections along the way. I do talk about this too, Sheldon, on the third thing that I would just add to this question is make sure that your eye contact is flowing with your punctuation. So when you're talking to this person here, you end the sentence or you pause, and then you finish over here and you're talking to that person and you pause, and then you just simply say, this is my last sentence, I'm done. And then you move on. So your commas or your periods are really great places to move from person to person to person in your audience. That way your tone and your inflection and some of those subtle nuances, especially when you're engaging with somebody, it doesn't feel like your eyes are just all over the place and it's crazy. You got kind of a little bit of a rhythm or cadence there. That really helps. Sheldon, can we get a copy of my college band? Somebody asked, can we get a copy of my college band, the music? Yes, you can. I will put it in the X Academy. Nate, my right-hand man, will make a bar, and it will you'll just be able to play the music there. And I might even let you download it. It's ridiculous. Real quick, Talia is the name that I butchered earlier, so my apologies, Talia. I'm so sorry. I'm an idiot. This Talia here. Look, see this whole thing. This whole oh, you got a master's degree? Oh, cool. Yeah. What are they giving those out at Chuck E. Cheese? That's how I feel, Talia. I'm sorry. Sorry. Forgive me. I didn't. You know how many tickets I had to get at skee ball to get that? A lot. All right, moving on. Do you memorize your message? This is from Angie. Do you memorize your message or do you take note cards on stage with you? Angie, I try and memorize my messages. And how I do that is we talk about this in the C4 content in the Axe Academy. We dig a little bit deeper here, but really what you want to do is you want to be able to name your parts in under 10 seconds or so. And so you want to start outlining your message. If you're a manuscript preacher, some people are totally okay. People do it. Andy Stanley, I think, manuscripts his messages. And he does awesome. He's reading it and he reads it and it's real succinct. And, I'm thrust into different situations where at a public school or in an arena like at NYC where I was with Talia, there's no way that that's going to work. Like me reading off notes, it's not going to fly. Because the audience, it just doesn't work. It's just, maybe somebody could, but I certainly haven't found a way. So I like to try and outline it, write my sermons, put them on note cards, write the chemicals, I lay it all on the floor. I got my emotional response. I'm looking at it. I'm rearranging. I'm like, whoa, man, I'm way too funny here for a while. This is way too heavy. I'm reversing it. I'm putting little breaths in. I'm making sure, to Sheldon's point, I'm adding some cadence and some frequency. And I'm like, okay, I got all this laid out, how I want it to go. And then I just start naming those parts. The message that I just gave, at NYC, I walked out there and I talked about Orville and Wilbur Wright, the plane with Jesus's command, Cain and Abel, Clue, 7, I guess, ideas of comparison, the way that we can battle comparison, what collaboration does, The Lion, 12 Disciples, Kitty Hawk, North Carolina. That was, I'm pretty sure we have to go back and watch it, but that was pretty much my message. to 9,000 amazing Nazarene students and leaders after communion. So if you can kind of take that keyword or phrase and memorize that, a lot of times that will help you spark the rest of your thought. The one thing I really like to do, and I'm looking to see if it's down here. I don't know that it is. Hold on. Okay, so perfect example. I've got a couple preaching Bibles. Some of you have seen a really ratty Bible, like it's super ratty. This is sort of a new one that's starting to get a little bit more ratty. But I'm going to show you real quick what I did here for a sermon that I just did at Desperation Student Conference. So I start out here. I just had to remember where I started in my Bible. That was an Acts. Let me just get there. I'm sorry. All right, so Acts. So you can see this is Acts 17 or so. And then here is those key words that I was trying to do. So Acts 17, and then Yoda, Chuck Norris, Chuck E. Cheese, Peter, Video 1, Age. Now I go to Matthew 17. So like I bought this Bible just for this message, and I've got a bunch of Bibles with different messages, but now I'm at Matthew 17. So if I flip over to Matthew 17, I guess what I'm trying to tell you, Ange, is create a roadmap in your Bible that you just follow. So now I'm in Matthew 17, okay? We go here, right? And then I go through some points. Jesus was 30. Luke 3:23. Older, 25. Like just different scriptures I want to reference. We get down here to disciple. And then I've got these disciples listed up here. And then it says right here, go to Matthew 20, 24. So I created a roadmap, so then when I'm at Matthew 20, now my next stop is Matthew 4:21. So we go back to Matthew 4:21. Okay, we get to Matthew 4:21. Sorry, this is so bad. And then, I'm just trying to show you, I actually do this. Then my next stop is back at Matthew 17. So, it is definitely memorization. I do like to create memory. If it's clear to you, it'll be clear to them. If you know your parts, you'll be able to flow in your parts. If you need a note card or notes, that's fine. It's not a bad thing. A lot of times I feel like, when you're talking to a friend at a coffee shop, Angie, let me just ask you this, and everyone. Let me start over. Angie, when you're talking to a friend at a coffee shop, do you use notes? Sheldon, think about that just for a second. When you're out with someone, and you're like at Subway, eating fresh, do you use notes? Like, let's say we met somewhere and then, you want to talk to me and, Justin, you're there, and I get this out. I'm like, Dustin, I'm glad that we're here today at Starbucks. I wanted to ask you, how are you doing? No, we don't use notes when we're talking to people. And so it feels like authentic conversation. And what I see a lot of times is people then use notes in, let's say, their communication, and they wonder why it doesn't feel authentic. It's because you don't use notes in conversation with people. And then when you're married to this, it feels like a speech rather than a conversation. And I always want to be marked as a communicator for someone who meets an audience where they're at, brings them where they want to be. They forget me, they remember the word. But I want it to feel like a dialogue, not a monologue. I want it to feel Like, it's like the two of us sitting down in an arena full of 9,000 other people, and we're having this talk. And I'm just letting you know how I feel about this. So I think that becomes a big crutch. And if I can be really transparent with all of you, there are times when I have like my notes, or like, let's say, an outline, and I'm tempted to bring it on stage. And the Holy Spirit just always whispers, just go throw the football. Just go do what you do. And I'll do the rest. You might forget something in your note, but just go there and flow in the gifts that I've given you. But at the same time, I've never just let that be the green light for not being prepared. But, that quarterback in the NFL, whoever your quarterback is, when they drop back in that pocket, to borrow that football metaphor, they're not like looking at their arm, looking at a YouTube video how to throw a football. They just go back and just throw a football. It's because they've practiced and they're ready to play. And so that's something that I would challenge you all with is, yes, use notes. Make sure you do it right with the linear. There's some tips that I do about that. But don't be surprised if your communication doesn't feel authentic when you use notes, because authentic communication with your friends face-to-face, you're never using notes. And live prepared versus get prepared. Live your message, be your message, breathe your message, stew in your message, and memorize those parts, simplify those parts, create a roadmap in a Bible or with props or with the room, but get to this pace where you can drop back in the pocket and you don't have to think about it. You can just go do it. And that's when I think you really find your voice. You really find who you are as a unique communicator, because you're not married to notes. You're not married to this idea of what you think should happen. You're just on the fly, and there's a kid in the front row that you talk to, and all of a sudden this whole thing changes. Nobody knew this, but 9,000 people at NYC, I walk out, and as I walk out, this kid right to my right starts barfing, like he's puking in the front row. Like, how do you prepare for that? Like, this kid just starts losing his lunch, like all over these people. You can hear it splash. People are running. And I'm like, how do you prepare for that? Like, you either acknowledge it and tie it in, and you're like, you know what? You're right. 2 Peter, that's exactly right. Going back to that vomit. So it's like going back to your sin. And so don't you go, like, you could tie it in, or you got to like coast over it, and you got to keep going, and you got to like know your content so something doesn't rattle you out of your frame of reference. I hope that helps. Nathan says this, that he always preaches with a Southern accent. Nathan, I can't help you there, man. It's nothing you can do. It's who you are. Just live it up, man. Just make sure when you come up, up here in the north, man. No, saying man. I don't know why I keep saying man, because Texans don't do that, or, even from the South, Louisiana, whatever. But you can be you. Preach with a Southern accent. I just was at a funeral. You say that, to be funny, but this guy, his name was Ivy Marsh, okay? And his name in the bulletin was spelled 1-5 Marsh. So I look at my wife. Remember, Tala, I'm bad at names. I look at my wife and I go, this guy's name is 4? His name is 4 Marsh? What the heck? Is anybody else seeing this? And, of course, it's Ivy for short. His real name's Joseph. But he had this really thick Alabama South accent. Now, I'm from Minnesota. Some people pick it up a little bit. I travel quite a bit, so it's usually pretty neutral. But Ivy got up in front of everybody, and Nathan, he used it. He says, hey, man, I'm Ivy Marsh, and I hope we can get through this without the language barrier. And he just went right into it, and like he acknowledged the fact that he was in the room full of Northerners in Minnesota that are all like, "Oh yeah, don't you know they're hey? Oh yeah, you betcha." And he's this guy with this Southern twang, and he used it to his advantage. Like, so don't be afraid to be you, but know your audience and know that you can use that in different audiences to actually like have them endure you to them. That's super great way that I've seen just a couple days ago for that to be done. This is a real question from, I think, myself to everyone, and I know you see it. Do I have to use Pokemon for my bookmarks, or will Digimon work too? Digimon are fine. I don't let my kids play with Digimon cards. It's because I love my kids, and I don't want them to just journey down like Digimon, My Little Pony, Dungeons and Dragons. That's how that goes. That's the slippery slope. Any other questions? Fire them away real quick. I got about 3 minutes left. I want to make sure this helps. I want to answer your questions that you have about communication. Just looking here, making sure. Anybody out there with a question, making sure, okay. Hey, good question, Dustin. Real quick, probably our last one. Let me just recap for everybody. If you're new or you just came in, this is the Axe Academy webinar. I'd like to field your questions and really answer what you want to know about a said topic. Make sure that you get into the Axe Academy. Be part of it. There's a number of podcasts. There's all these things that we made for you so you can emerge to do whatever it is that you want to do. Support it if you can. It's a generosity-driven platform. Our time and our energy, it's all just 100% goes right back into making stuff for you and people like you, so you can really, truly be the hero in your world and in your calling. You can see it come to pass. So make sure you check out some of the resources and tools that we have. We usually do a webinar every month. There's a podcast or two every month with really like a private session of that podcast. It's called the Extended Axecast. There's courses, there's questions, there's paths, there's books, there's all kinds of stuff that you can be involved in. Dustin asked this question, and I'm going to end with this unless someone fires this up. Tips for getting youth in small groups to open up and communicate. Number one, if you didn't hear that, everybody, it's in the chat. Tips for how do you get youth in a small group setting to open up and communicate? Number one, you have to ask the right questions. And by the right questions, I mean open-ended questions. Avoid the yes, no, sometimes, rarely, non-applicable type answers. Avoid those questions because you'll get one word, succinct, emphatic answers. You got to ask those open-ended questions with follow-up questions. The one thing, that's the first thing. So ask the right questions. Number two, think of small groups. When you're leading a small group, communicating with them, think of them as a funnel. You don't want to start with, hey, what happens when we die? Like, that's not a good funnel question to start with. That might be down here. What do you think happens when we die? But what happens here, if you're going to ask that question and these questions, like once you get down into the funnel, are heavy questions where you want them to open up and communicate with each other, well, it's going to take a little bit of trust within that social group for them to reveal their real answer. And so you got to start building the trust here. with your questions that lead you to a question. What do you think happens when we die? You know, like, why are Nutter Butters so good? Well, let me tell you why I think. You know, what's the one place that you want to go before you die? You know, like, you start asking questions that lead you to the meat. I think that's really important. That really funnel it down. So that would be the second thing. First thing, ask the right questions. Second thing, think of it as a funnel. Third thing, when you're dealing with small groups, especially in students, I think sometimes we avoid this, but don't be afraid of their tribe that they want to wrestle with these questions with. I think sometimes we do a disservice to students where we're like, you need to go with this. Okay, all the ones over here, all the twos over here, threes down here, fours get over here. And then we pair these students that have no social network, that have no relational trust or equity, and we then expect them to answer the question, you know, what's your greatest struggle right now? They're not going to do that. They're just not going to answer that question around those people. It doesn't mean that they don't like those people. It doesn't mean that it couldn't work eventually. But people are just going to withhold that at a level of comfort, if that makes sense. So I don't try and, you know, like, fight the tribe. I try and pair the tribe. Get people together in small groups that are going to be together, that run together, that go together, and then challenge that group to keep reaching out, to keep being not just a clique, but a tribe that goes there to like really try and reach others. You know, so those three things: ask the right questions, avoid the like one-word succinct answers like the plague. Number two, think of the small group as a funnel. Don't start with the hard stuff. Build trust along the way and get to the one or two questions you really want to wrestle with. And don't try and pair them up with a bunch of people that they don't have like equity or trust with. That's a tough thing. You're already working against yourself if you do that in a very cold way. Don't, you know, fight those tribes, like mirror those tribes, run with those tribes in those small group settings. I think those three things will really help students kind of emerge. The fourth thing I would simply say is students will never be willing to go where you haven't led. Students will never be willing to go where you haven't led. And so if you, as the small group leader, are not leading them there yourself with your own story, your own perspective, your own struggle, your own questions, then honestly, man, don't expect them to lead you. You know, don't expect them to just oh, hey, you know what? I got this. Don't worry about it. So I think those four things might help a little bit. Man, Craig, thanks for your kind words, man. That's means a lot. My humbleness at NYC in Phoenix. Thank you for that. Hey, just that means a lot, Craig. It really does. I don't want to. We get caught so easy in this, like, this professional pastor or this popularity thing, man, and that's just not me. I never want to be a part of the ministry or this thing. I just want to be a guy the same off stage, on stage, that's pursuing Christ like the rest of us, like all of us, and available in the rec hall and not in a green room, and just with people, man. They're just not a distraction to the ministry. They are the ministry. So thank you for that. It means a lot. Any other thoughts, questions? Tala, I'm so sorry for butchering your name. I'm an idiot. I told you that. I apologize. Please forgive me. Hey, listen, everybody, make sure that you go online if you are here. Make sure you're here tonight. If you're a guest, make sure you go check out the rest of Acts, number 1. Support it if you can. But check out the podcast, the Acts Academy, the Acts Cast. It's just available wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it, send it. People don't have to, follow me on Instagram or all that other crap. But if you're looking for some of that like information and revelation, make sure you just find the Acts Cast and listen to it. It's usually really concise, very topical, 18 to 25 minutes. Make sure you send somebody there, share it with somebody, but please review it so it gets some more stars. So when people are looking at it, they go, I kind of maybe want to read it. That would be amazing. But really no pressure either way. So next month, watch your inbox for the next Acts Cast. Any other questions? Going once, twice? Let me pray for you as you go. If you're a follower of Jesus, pray with me. If you're not, pray with me because, man, God has got a plan for your life. Believe me, it is true. So, God, I just thank you for all these people that are here, all these leaders that came together at like so many different walks of life and backgrounds. I just ask that you would continue to help them pursue excellence in their communication, for them to invest in how they're going to say it, just as much as what they're going to say. I would pray, God, that this would help them take people from point A to point B in a very eloquent, creative way, so their message that is found in your word that you've downloaded to them, it would be what is remembered. I pray for the person that's out there, I don't know who it was, but just really wrote the fact that they asked, how would they be unique? God, I just ask that you remind them tonight when their head hits the pillow that they're unique. And it would be something they're working from, not to. It would be something that they would realize they are versus journey to be. And I just pray that over that person's life, God, that you just remind them that you've made them as they are, who they are, for a purpose and a reason. And let the be that measure, not numbers and shares and likes and all the other immeasurables that just don't matter. God, we just thank you for this moment that we can have at the Acts Academy with these leaders and students. Guide and direct our lives. In your name we pray. Amen.